So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, I just want to say that I don't think you will find a more serious and rigorous scholar of theology in the church than Blake Osler.
What Joseph Smith is teaching, as I take it, is what Jesus was teaching in John 14 through 17, this kind of mutual glorification.
Blake is the author of the Exploring Mormon Thought book series and podcast with the same name, which you can find on Spotify or iTunes. Blake is fluent or semi-fluent in 9 languages, including Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Egyptian. He will take because I believe that we walk by faith in life. Okay?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
And what does that mean? To me, it means faith is where you place your chips. And it's manifested in your behavior. Your behavior manifests where you place your faith. And because everyone has to behave in the world and do things in the world, everyone places their faith somewhere.
That's right.
And so when I think about that, I go, where should I place my faith? What should govern my behavior? What worldview is it that undergirds my belief system? And I'm sorry, it's getting, we've gone, I don't know how long you were planning on doing this, but if you have another 15 minutes, I would like to actually show you something.
Yeah.
So the witnesses don't give you perfect rational certainty. They give you a level of confidence that something is true and real. Okay.
Yeah.
And then based on that, we place our faith, we place our chips on something being true. And we act as though it is real and true. And everybody does that. The question is, where are you placing your faith?
Yeah.
And why? And what I want to share, let me actually see if I can pull this up real quick. I believe one of the greatest scriptures in the world, in my opinion, that was a big help to me as I kind of was navigating my faith, was Jesus goes up and he tells people about the sacrament. And he says, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And people are kind of like, whoa, dude, that's weird. And it says a bunch of people left, and Jesus looked to his disciple and he said, will you leave too? And Peter had his famous answer. He said, where will we go? What he's asking is where are we going to place our faith if not in you? Like, I have to place my faith somewhere. So I created this little flow chart, and I've been wanting to talk with someone about it.
Guinea pig.
So, because I believe that there are only so many options available as to where you can place your worldview. So here we have, I'm going to bring this thing full screen. And as we look at this, you have kind of the first level of conversation, right? You start to examine your life. And I believe the first question we really ask is, who are we, right? And the first thing, there's just a binary. There either is some sort of a higher power, something you might call God, or there's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's say that you place your faith that God exists. Well, now you're in the world of theism, really, normally. You could also be a pantheist, but I believe pantheism and deism, if I kind of laugh about this. So if a person does not believe in God, or a person believes in God and they say, well, God is everything. It's the universe. It's, that pantheism where God is everything.
Yeah.
The problem is, if God is everything, then God is nothing. Because if you're in order to be something particular, you have to be distinct from everything else.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because that was sort of the Christian view of the Trinity, which I find hard to comprehend. Like, God is everywhere, omniscient, omnipresent, and it's the more I dived into it, I found it hard to really understand that. Like, so how do you separate the Holy Spirit from the Father if they're both omniscient, omnipresent?
Yeah. Pantheism is inherently logically broken, because it's just atheism with more steps. Because at the end of the day, if God is nothing in particular, then he does not exist. To exist, you must be something in particular. You're just calling everything God. It's like, what are you talking about? And then you also have deism, right? So deism is where God set the world into motion. There was some sort of a higher power, but it doesn't interact with us in any way. And there's this brilliant quote by Elder Christofferson where he says, "A God who does not demand anything of you is the functional equivalent of a God who does not exist." It's
I
like,
remember that quote.
If God no way interacts with us, if there's no like connection between us and him, and like what, then you go back to no God. So theism is the only option for someone who actually believes in God, like that God actually exists. Because the other options, pantheism and deism, they lead you to atheism. They're just atheism with more steps, right? And
I also had the thought right before my personal epiphany experience. I also thought, if I don't believe in a God who can speak to me, I also thought there's no point believing in that God or worshiping that. If I don't believe that this God will interact or communicate with me, he might as well not be there as well. That's how I felt. So whenever I was being discouraged, well, don't pray and ask about these things. Some Christians was that's how you could be deceived. I was like, no, like that. Is God that weak? You know, that he's unable to answer my prayer?
Absolutely. And so these lead you back to atheism, just with more steps. I always say pantheism and deism just are atheism with more steps. Now, when there is no God, right? This means that the universe is purposeless. It's just a cosmic accident, and it's filled with suffering and malevolence. And in my mind, in all honesty, I don't go through the secular humanism route to get to nihilism, which I'll talk about here in a second. I go straight to nihilism because the world is, there's one thing that I think we should all just recognize. One of the great truths of Christianity is that we live in a fallen world. And I'm sorry, if your life is pretty good, great, congratulations. That only magnifies how unfair it is. Because you know how many creatures in existence have suffered and then died? And if it's all for nothing, like, what are you talking about? I would much rather say this never should have existed. It's like a cruel joke. Like, why? With all the suffering and pain and misery, and you're like, well, my life's pretty good. It's like, yeah, go tell that to all the other people that had horrible, meaningless lives, that suffered with some delusion the whole time that there was some God that was going to take care of them in the next life, and then they died. And it was all just madness. And in my mind, it's like, what? For nothing. And nihilism, I think, is a very powerful argument. But then people say, well, we can create our own values, and that goes to secular humanism. And again, we could talk. I love to crap all over secular humanism because I find it to be an absolute joke. It's just Christianity without everything that makes Christianity what it is. It says humans have inherent value. It's like, really? And by the way, anyone watching this, if you want to debate me on secular humanism and why it actually is meaningless nonsense, I'd love to do that. But needless to say, that's where it takes me, right? It always leads. I do not find secular humanism sustainable. And so anything without God leads to nihilism, I think, logically. I think secular humanism is just a gut response that people have because they can't handle nihilism. And I don't blame them. It's more like it's the opium of the masses, in my opinion, as Marx would say. Yeah. So that leads us to the only real viable option here. Now, granted, you can say, I believe that there is a real, there's a real case to say that nihilism is the answer. There is no God. There is no purpose. This is all a big cosmic accident. I don't believe that, and I have lots of reasons why. And because of that, I believe that there is some sort of a higher power.
For me, I find that a somewhat depressing worldview. It's one that I've thought about, and to me, I find it very empty and depressing.
And the question is this: why would you place your faith in that? This is Pascal's wager. Pascal is saying, look, we got to place our faith somewhere. So why would you place it in, oh, it's all meaningless, purposeless, nothing? You don't gain anything out of that. And the thing is, you could be wrong. There's a chance that there's something bigger to the universe. I believe that's why most people on earth are believers.
Yeah.
It's because I think somewhere deep down they know that this doesn't make any sense to place my faith in like nothing, because I can't live that way. I don't live that way. I functionally act as though things matter.
Yeah.
And not only that they matter now, but that they matter in some sort of a bigger picture. Right. And so anyway, I think the path to that is that there is some sort of a higher power that interacts with the universe. There is a God. But then we go to, okay, well, what is the nature of God? Now we've just jumped into the level 2 conversation, theology. We're trying to understand the nature of this higher power. Okay? So there are only so many major sort of seriously thought out movements in human history about the nature of God and this higher power. You have Islam, you have Christianity, you have Judaism, you have paganism, which I would put Hinduism into that same camp, kind of a polytheistic sort of worldview, or what I call vague spiritualism. That's like all of the manifestations of like, well, God's like, kind of woo-woo in the universe, and it's very vague, and and it's self-contradictory, and there's all sorts of problems.
Would Buddhism fall under that category? Kind of like spiritualism as well?
What was that?
Would Buddhism, would it fall under that category?
Yeah, probably Buddhism would fall under a type of spiritualism, because Buddhism doesn't have a lot to say about things like creation.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's kind of a problem. like it's not a very
theology, I don't think, in Buddhism.
It's a very shallow theology. Paganism, very shallow theology. I would say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the 3 great monotheistic movements, I can disagree with them, but they're sophisticated.
Yes. Yeah.
They're highly intellectually interesting in the world of, okay, if there's a higher power, what is the nature of that higher power? Right. And then I settled on Christianity, and now comes the level 3 conversation, Christian theology. What is the nature of Jesus Christ? What is the nature of this, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as manifest through him? And do you see how now I'm getting somewhere where I can, like, where am I placing my faith? Am I placing it in spiritualism? Am I placing it in pantheism, which is just take me to nihilism? Am I placing it in Islam? Right? Like, you're going to go somewhere down that path. Everyone you know is going down that path, and their actions will manifest where they are. And most people actually are not nihilists because they don't act like it.
Yeah.
They actually subconsciously still retain in their spirit and in their soul some sort of a light that tells them that life is bigger than that. And some people say, oh, the nihilists say, well, that's just, their biology, working itself out fine. But is that where I'm going to place my faith? Does that make any sense? What if is there a chance that there's something more to life? Fine, go to spiritualism. Don't define God. Make it really vague and unknown, whatever. A lot of people go there.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of people that leave the church either go agnostic or probably that vague spiritualism. There's a God, but he could be everywhere, just the universe.
Yep. I would say right now, that's probably the fastest growing religion in the world. I don't think that the people of Europe, and you'd know this better than me, and increasingly the United States is going that way, that they're all becoming hard atheists.
Mhm.
Hard atheists generally end up as secular humanists. That's where Dawkins and all those guys are. They're all secular humanists, because they just reject any sort of a higher power. But the point, my point with this whole thing is, where will you go?
Yeah. And there kind of is not much middle ground in some ways. I think that could be a conversation either for another time if we don't have time to talk about it here. But the question is there middle ground? Can you be neutral in the church? And the church is sort of set up itself that it's either true or it's not. It's either like the kingdom of God or it's nothing. And yes, there's gray and there's nuance, but like either Joseph Smith had a first vision or he didn't. Either the Book of Mormon is true or
and you
it's
could
not.
go back to being some sort of a mere Christian where you believe in Christianity that maybe fall more under a Protestant type movement, but there's no like true church, right? And so within that level 3 conversation, yes, either the restored church is true or you got to go back in the map. You've got to go back into your Christianity and figure it out. But some people go back into their Christianity, they can't maintain it. And then they go back into their theism and they say, you know what? I'm just going to nihilism and into atheism, right?
Mhm.
The thing is that there isn't a lot of middle ground. Everyone falls into one of these categories because you can't be in 2 categories at once. You can't be both a pantheist and a Latter-day Saint. You're just confused.
Yeah. And even when you look at Jesus's words, they don't allow for much middle ground. It's like either you're for me or you're against me. You're either my disciple or you're not. And the scriptures say you can't really be lukewarm. You can't kind of be one foot in and one foot out. And that's something that I think I've been a little bit guilty of since coming back and having maybe some nuanced or more progressive view. You can, when you view that maybe the prophets have been wrong in this instance, or maybe scripture's not 100% the word of God, it can lead people. I think it can cause people to pick and choose a little bit, and then that can become cafeteria Mormonism in some ways, and then they can justify not following everything, or I'm going to follow these things. This sits right with me. This resonates with me. But these parts, I don't think that's inspired. I don't think that's God. And that can lead to another problem as well.
And we all, to some extent, don't have perfect, we all have teachings that we have issues with, or things that we might think that are out of the ordinary. That's fine. The question I have is, where have you placed your faith?
Yeah.
Where, like, you don't have to have everything figured out. The question is at the end of the day, fundamentally, which one of these have you placed your faith on?
Yeah.
And the reality is that you're like, I would love for someone to come and explain where they place their faith that doesn't somehow map onto this map. I made this map with that in mind. Like, where is it? Right now, maybe there's some version of pantheism that I don't have on here or something, but the basic idea is that this is kind of what you're left with. And frankly, you have no idea how many times I've had to go back to, okay, well, if not this, then what?
Yeah.
And I've asked the exact same question. I said the same thing that Peter said to Jesus. Well, where am I going to go? Like, to secular humanism? Like, I've looked at secular humanism. And this is the thing. It isn't, I don't say this because like, oh, I just want to like stay in the church. No, it's because I've actually looked at the other options. I've looked at them in detail. And I can tell you, it's like, there's this funny joke. They say democracy is a terrible form of government, except for when compared to every other form.
Yeah.
I oftentimes with stuff like, man, we got a lot of weird stuff in our history and stuff, but you know what? When I go look at these other worldviews, and I don't mean just that they don't feel good. I mean that they don't explain the world that I live in. Like, I'm not a meat computer.
Yeah.
I am not just a bag of cells that doesn't have agency. Like, there are some things that, like, as sure as I can be sure of. And that just destroys like the atheist side of the equation. and it opens up the possibilities to all sorts of things. And so I'm not walking into this blindly putting my faith somewhere. I'm looking at all of the available options and saying, look, where am I going to place my bet in life? Because I got to live. And agnosticism is a misnomer. It's a cop-out bunch of bullcrap. You can be agnostic in your intellectual. You can say, I'm not 100% confident. And I was like, yeah, congratulations. We're never 100% confident.
Yeah,
The
we're all
question
agnostic in that way.
We're all agnostic in that way. You can't be agnostic in your behavior. You can't be agnostic in your behavior. And so that's why Jordan Peterson is out there saying, I act as though God exists. Because he recognizes that he does. And so the thing is, at some point, you place your faith in that God exists.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say that's what faith is. That's why, and this isn't some made up bullcrap thing that I'm just inventing off the top of my head. Go read James. That's what James says. He's saying faith without works is dead because your faith is manifested by your works.
Yeah.
So
that's so true. In closing off, and we could always continue this another time, but what's sort of like your thoughts on those people who are kind of in the middle? Like I kind of see myself as somebody who is a believer, who wants to believe, who loves so many things about the restored gospel, who loves so many things about the scriptures, who wants to be in the church. And for 22 years of my life, just it was all 100% true, loved everything. And then since being back, there can be that cognitive dissonance. There can be that I believe, but I have unbelief. And is there a place for those people who either have faith struggles or doubts, or even people who might even disagree with the church on certain things? Should they be allowed to? Should we be encouraging them to stay in the church? Because some members might see it as, well, if you don't accept everything, or if you have some doubts about things, maybe you shouldn't come. I'm curious to get your take on it, and then I'd be happy to share sort of my thoughts as well.
So everyone is in that boat to some extent. The question is just how conflicted are you with your faith? How much cognitive dissonance do you have between these different witnesses of truth that are hitting you? My thing is as a Christian, as a Latter-day Saint, I say, stay the course. Place your faith in Jesus Christ. Live. There's no better option. The secondary questions are endless. I think you made a great point with that. They're endless. Figure out the primary ones, which I would say go back to this stuff. These are the primary questions. And then live your life accordingly. And work to try and work these things out. It's okay. But at the end of the day, recognize you're always going to have to place your faith somewhere. And I would encourage them to place their faith in the restoration of the church and to stay.